Welcome to Inquiry. Today I'm talking with author William Cooper about the book How America Works and Why It Doesn't, a brief guide to the US political system. William, I have my first question is what is the raison d'etre of the book? For what purpose did you write the book? Why would people read this book?
Thanks for having me, Eugene, and great question. The book was written in an effort to actually explain why the American polity is functioning the way it is today. I think most people, you can never say everybody, but most people agree there's a lot of dysfunction. One side blames the other, the other side blames that side. There's a lot of disagreement about why we find ourselves where we are, even though there's not much disagreement that something doesn't feel right and that the polity is not functioning well. So I wanted to take a crack at really getting at the root cause of why we find ourselves where we do.
And as the book is divided between what does work and what doesn't work, so let's begin with the question of what features of American politics do or have worked before.
Yeah, I think if you look at human history, you take a long view of human history, the American experiment has been very successful. Where history, uh, government in history before tended not to go very well. We were dominated, people were dominated by kings and tyrants, wars, famine, all of that was much worse than it is today. And I think the American experiment is it really brought out a lot of the reasons why things have improved. And so the basic structure of separation of powers, federalism, strong court system, the hallmarks of our system, I think, tend to work well and have worked well.
Within your book, you're describing a republican system, a democracy, and you just mentioned federalism. So the question is, what system are we in?
It's a really good question. I mean, and there's lots of disagreement about that, but we are a constitutional democracy. We are a republic, so it's not direct democracy. We hire through the voting process representatives to represent us, and then once they're in office, their job is to represent the people, but the people don't actually control the workings of government. And of course, the judiciary is populated by judges that are nominated and confirmed by the president and the Senate. So it's not a full-fledged, max out democracy. It's a constitutional republic.
You're referencing this as a federalist system. So what is federalism?
Federalism is a really, really important concept and part of our government that I don't think gets enough attention or credit for how well it functions and how important it is. Federalism is two layers. There's a federal government, um, and that is primarily in Washington, D.C., though the tentacles are very much global. But that's the president, the House of Representatives, and the Senate, and the federal judiciary. But each state, on top of that, has its own system with a governor and a legislature and court system. And then even municipalities, cities, towns, um, small organizations, they have their governments as well. So federalism is a scenario where you have all these different layers of government, and each layer has its own function and purpose.
So what is the benefit of federalism? Wouldn't it be better to have a more centralized system?
Well, the central government at the federal level is really important for certain things, primarily foreign affairs, right? We need to speak with one voice on the global uh, scene, and a president is our head of state. But a lot of what government does is, and this is what I think tends to be forgotten because so much attention is paid to the federal government, but a lot of the core functioning of government is actually state and local. And that's a good thing. The reason that's a good thing is because if you have a choice between people in government telling you what to do in Washington, D.C., thousands of miles away, or people in your own locality who know the conditions of the locality, who know and understand the people, know and understand the issues firsthand. Often, not always, but often you choose the latter just because they're more informed and more sensitive to the local concerns.
And as you write in the book, if the federal government is taking advantage of their power, the states will protect the citizens. If the states are abusing their power, the federal government can step in. So it provides a double protection of citizens, the people that are supposed to run the government.
That's
Thank you,
very
William.
that's very well put, Eugene.
Thank you, William. You supporting a free speech. So what is free speech and why is it important for our government?
Free speech is the idea that most, but not everything that people say should be allowed, should be protected, should even be encouraged. This robust marketplace of ideas where people are confident and comfortable speaking freely is very important for human flourishing. It allows all ideas to get looked at and to get their time of day. It allows the smarter, more logical, more rational views to rise and to govern. If you start picking and choosing who's allowed to say what, history shows that that tends to smother good ideas and it tends to amplify bad ideas. So give everybody an opportunity to speak, respect that, have protections built in to allow that, and then trust that the best ideas will rise. And it doesn't always work that way. There's no foolproof way to have all the best ideas always win the day. But on balance, when you try to stifle free speech, the impact is much, much worse than if you allow a free marketplace of ideas to flourish.
When we experiment with ideas, we can easily figure or more easily figure out which ones are better or worse and filter them out.
Yes.
Who benefits from a suppression of free speech?
In the long run, I don't think anybody does. I think in the short term, the people that try to keep speech suppressed may win by keeping that speech suppressed, but it's a harm. So the narrow victory for the suppressors is that their ideas don't face full competition in the marketplace of ideas. But over the long run, I don't think anybody wins. If you have a system that allows and promotes suppressing speech, even speech you really strongly dislike, I think it's a losing formula in the long term.
You can only prevent questioning your own side for so long until somebody else gets power and starts to suppress yours. So it's a recrimination, which we'll talk shortly about.
Absolutely.
And William, one of the things that you mentioned in the book is that free speech enables negotiation through words rather than through violence. So that's a important
Yeah.
feature.
There's a number of features of free speech that are really important. One of them is that when you suppress people's speech, they often get very upset and they often lash out. It builds anger and frustration. And so having a robust marketplace of ideas doesn't just allow the best ideas to emerge, it allows people to vent their feelings. It allows people to feel like they've been heard, to feel like they have a platform that matters. And that venting is really important. And if it's not allowed, if it's stifled, people can lash out through violence. And history has shown that groups of people that have had their speech suppressed have a much higher incident rate of being violent. And of course, that's something we want to discourage.
Thank you. Well, now that we've talked about what works in America, so what features of American politics do not work?
I think the biggest problem that we have today, and it really is corroding a lot of the institutions of our country and hallmarks and traditions of our country that have worked very long time, is extreme polarization. And extreme polarization and irrationality in the tribal warfare that we see. When you've got a huge percentage of your country not looking at things rationally, but instead irrationally through a highly partisan lens, the outcomes are going to be much worse than if you had a higher rate of rationality. And I think that's the single biggest thing in our country that's not working right now. Our debate is not often about getting to the right answer. It's about winning an argument and showing why the other side's bad. And that is not a good recipe for outcomes over the long term.
How would you define rationality? Because there's many different uses in our society.
Absolutely. And it's really important to define it. It's really important not to think you have, whether it's me or anyone else, has a monopoly on what's right and what's wrong. But I think rationality and the rationality that I'm advocating for is just respect, primarily was just respect for facts. Okay? Just respect for facts. If it's true that something good happens while the president of the United States from the opposing party happens to be in office, that fact should not be erased from the equation. If something good happens while your guy is in office, that shouldn't be amplified and magnified beyond what it actually deserves. And so I think everybody, if we were to say, okay, what do the facts here suggest? What are the facts here? What conclusion should be drawn from the facts? And just let that fall where it falls. Let the facts lead you to your decision. We'd have so much more rationality. Instead, facts are amplified dramatically if people like them, and they're diminished, frankly, often erased if you don't like them. Here's an example. Yesterday, very prominent example. Yesterday, SpaceX, a company owned by Elon Musk, who's a partisan lightning rod, went and brought back, and they arrived yesterday, two astronauts that had been stuck in outer space. It was a very good thing. A lot of the commentary from people that don't like Elon Musk just completely ignored, erased the fact that it was SpaceX that brought them home. You could read an entire article or a full blurb from a news organization, and they didn't even mention that. And I have a lot of criticisms of Elon Musk. I think a lot of what he's doing right now is very unsavory, and a lot of it's going to be reversed in the courts because it's not even constitutionally permitted. But I'm not going to simply erase the fact that he was involved in bringing these astronauts back. He was. That should be acknowledged. It's a fact, and it should be accepted, and it should be included in the discussion of what happened with those astronauts.
As you mentioned, tribalism. How does tribalism affect politics? How does tribalism affect how the person processes information?
Tribalism has a astounding impact on politics. Our system is set up with Democrats versus Republicans, and then you go on social media and you can gravitate towards the echo chamber that you prefer. And we are innately biased and predisposed to tribalism. So you add all that together, and there's a flywheel accelerating. Every day it gets more and more powerful. And what tribalism does is, it makes people really, really feel extremely positive and warm about their side. My side can do no wrong, so many people think, and then searing antipathy for the other side. And it means that you excuse mistakes that your side makes. It means that you promote things from your side that you shouldn't. And it makes it so that when the other side does something good, it doesn't matter. You find ways to criticize them anyway. And there's still a lot of people that do have a level head, right? So people that have a level head, when they hear people excusing Donald Trump's indecency, they know that that's ridiculous. When Donald Trump says things that a 10-year-old on the school playground will get suspended from school for saying from the Oval Office, people who are not completely ridden with tribalism know that that's a very unfortunate thing to be happening with the president of the United States. And likewise, on the other side, when Joe Biden was clearly declining his mental facilities from the Oval Office, and tens of millions of Democrats said it was fine and he would totally had his wits about him, and that lasted for months and months and months. Level-headed people knew that was ridiculous, and so they lost a lot of credibility. So tribalism just causes people to think about things very irrationally, and people that have some objectivity in how they view these things recognize it immediately, and it really undercuts your cause. Our elections often boil down to moderates and swing voters and people in the middle. You are going to repel them if you're effusively tribal in how you think.
Thank you, Will. And you mentioned a few biases, such as narrative bias and confirmation bias. Would you like to explain what they are for a moment?
Yeah. So one of the things that happens with tribalism is that there's big general tribalism where both sides hate each other and love themselves. But there's also really more specific cognitive biases that all fit into that general category. Confirmation bias has an unbelievable impact on human experience in general. We all experience it, but in politics, it's tremendous. It goes back to what I was talking about earlier. You interpret new information to confirm your existing worldview. If you love Joe Biden and then he gets up and gives a speech and doesn't speak coherently and trips and falls on his way back to, you'll just deflect that. You don't like it. It doesn't fit your worldview, so you won't give it much weight. If you really dislike Joe Biden, that will be an enormous indication that he's, you know, completely unfit for office. So confirmation bias is about interpreting information to fit your pre-existing worldviews. The narrative fallacy is one that's, I think, less commonly talked about and understood, but it's very, very powerful. Human beings have an innate bias. We all have it. It's how we think. We have an innate bias to take disparate pieces of information and weave big stories that actually aren't accurate. We take what we know, we take what we have, and in order to make sense of it, we tell stories to ourselves and to other people. But those stories are often very incomplete, and they're often very inaccurate and wrong. And in politics, you see that over and over and over again. So many people's political views are actually stories they tell themselves that have been filtered through the narrative fallacy and are really, really inaccurate.
And then after tribalism, you mentioned how the social media affects politics. How does social media affect politics?
It allows people to go to their echo chamber, right? And we see it more and more today. Twitter, and now we've got Blue Sky and Facebook groups and who you follow and who you block. Social media allows you, we're already tribal human beings, we're already stricken by confirmation bias. Social media takes those weaknesses and exacerbates them dramatically by creating this never-ending flow of confirming information, confirming bias, just hardening and hardening the biases we already have.
Well, in part, people can just search for the alternative views, but how does social media prevent the audience from receiving the alternative views?
It gives the users, people have the tools with social media to very easily create their cascade of confirming information. So on Twitter, just follow the people you like. Just press follow if you like the person. If you don't like them, either don't follow them or even block them. Now there's Blue Sky, which is a great platform, but it's primarily people on the left. So you don't even really have to do that as much on Blue Sky if you're liberal. You just hop on there and that's the information you're getting. With Facebook, you can sign up for different feeds. And what also happens with these social media companies is the algorithms that run the platform, they're specifically engineered to give you what you want. So if you're clicking on Fox News on Facebook over and over and over again, it's going to start sending you more Fox News articles, more right leaning articles, and vice versa. So these are elaborate platforms developed by very sophisticated engineers specifically to exacerbate confirmation bias because that's what generates the most activity, the most clicks, the most eyeballs, the most controversy, the most retweets. And so there's this incredibly powerful flywheel of social media that just makes the problem worse and worse and worse.
I now have a conflict with what you just mentioned within this
Wonderful.
conversation. So earlier we discussed the importance of free speech. By the way social media operates, it limits free speech to just your side. So how does free speech operate within social media? It seems divergent.
Well, so a few thoughts there. Social media, typically just users using it allows everybody to operate with their own free will. If you want to be on Blue Sky, if you want to be on Twitter, you're allowed to do it. Nobody's forcing anything. And people have the freedom to choose the information streams they want. If there was a scenario with social media where the government required you to be on Twitter but not Blue Sky, or Facebook but not um, an alternative platform, that would be a huge infringement of free speech because you'd be deprived of a platform. So, in my view, the ideal way to approach speech in general, whether it's your legal system, whether it's how you use social media, whether it's the way you express yourself in your community, is to have a diversity of views. So the optimal way to approach social media, in my view, for consumption purposes, is to follow a wide variety of people. The social media platforms allow that, but it's actually an excess of freedom and an excess of opportunity that's the problem I have with social media, where you have all of these options and people are free to choose just the ones they want, and they have tools to get the information they want. So I don't see the problem being a restraint of free speech. I see the problem being tools that are not illegal, but allow people to limit their consumption. Now, I will say social media platforms can also get into problems with free speech if the people running the platform start blocking participants on the system based on political views. If somebody's harassing somebody else or threatening someone else or engaging in dangerous behavior, I think it's fine to eliminate them from the platform. But if you start doing that based on politics or ideology, I think that would be a real problem.
Thank you. Well, the third problem that you saw with American politics was the American two-party political system. How does the two-party political system affect politics?
Well, it's the third component of the big flywheel I'm talking about. First is cognitive bias that we all have. The second is social media, the online ecosystem, and then the what you would want from a political system faced with those two challenges is to have a calming influence on tribalism. We have the opposite. Our system turbocharges tribalism because there's two parties that dominate everything. And the fewer the tribes, the worse the tribalism. So you've got Democrats waking up every day. How can I destroy Republicans in the political arena? Republicans waking up every day. How can I destroy Democrats? And if we had more parties, it wouldn't solve all our problems by any means. There would still be challenges. But I think it would have a material reduction in the animosity and just the hardcore partisanship we see today, with this big, huge juggernaut on one side and big, huge juggernaut on the other.
Rather than directing fury at only one opponent, now it's being divided by many. If we include more political parties, but which brings me with the critique of there are actually technically more than two political parties. Why aren't they being represented more in our political system?
Yeah, the problem is not a complete absence of other parties. The problem is a complete absence of other parties that mean anything. I mean, they don't, I mean, the third place in American politics, it never gets close to unseating the two incumbents. A third party can be a spoiler in an election, Ross Perot, Ralph Nader. It can tip the scales one way or the other, but that's just kind of a random impact. Sometimes it's a good thing, sometimes it's a bad thing. But in terms of capturing the hearts and minds of Americans in a lasting way and impacting the day-to-day workings of our government and Congress and how people think about issues, we only have the two. And they're not very good at lots of types of governing. Democrats and Republicans are not very good at governing in many respects, but they are incredibly good at maintaining their duopoly. So no other party ever gets real traction. And I think that's unfortunate. I think if you had additional political parties that actually mattered, you'd have completely different perspectives entering the debate. And those new ideas would often actually carry the day and be better, than what we have now. The world is not just one approach or the other on complicated issues. There's lots of different ways to look at things. And if we had more political parties, I think it would enrich the debate dramatically.
Thank you. Well, one of the methods that you write about how the two political parties affect politics is that they have criminalized politics. How has politics been criminalized?
Well, as you see, every day today, I mean, Trump literally yesterday, or maybe it was the day before, was trying to say he's unpardoning people who have been pardoned. Um, our debate is not just about who's right or wrong on the merits. The tribalism that I've been talking about is so extreme that people are on both sides of the aisle. I mean, Trump was prosecuted repeatedly in the last few years. Both sides of the political matter, they don't want to settle the debate at the ballot box. They don't want to settle the debate in the public square. They want to throw their opponents in jail. And it happens to different degrees and in different ways throughout the country. It's not just a Donald Trump thing. It's not just something that relates to him or to Hunter Biden, things of that nature. It's a part of the fabric of the debate at this point. I mean, if you look at the debate at all levels, from the president to Congress to people in the public arena, there's this consistent push to say the other side isn't just wrong, but they broke the law. And I think that's really unhealthy for our country. Certainly, if a politician actually does break the law, then a proportional prosecution is an appropriate response to that. But the bloodlust both sides has to see their opponents in jail, not just losing the policy debate, not just beating them in an election, but putting them in jail. I think it's really unhealthy. I mean, when you arrest somebody, you put them on trial, and you put them on jail. That's the use of force. And so it's one step closer to a broader political problem that involves not just debate, but the use of force. So I think it's a dangerous, slippery slope and one that we really need to get control of.
We may need to follow laws, but as you point out in the book, the government doesn't do well when it's constantly demobilized by the purposeful recrimination of politicians. It uses up a lot of resources and attention, which should be going into governance, not settling disputes legally.
Yes, well put.
Right. And well, in the book, you reference one event in which the law was used appropriately in terms of Watergate. Do you wish to talk about Watergate?
Yeah, there's definitely examples where a legal system functions the right way, even in the political domain. And I think Watergate was a good example. Nixon committed crimes while he was in office. He was going to be impeached and probably removed from office, so he resigned. So that was a system, that was an example where the pressure from the system moved in the right direction and had a good impact. And then numerous of Nixon's uh, people in the Nixon administration were actually prosecuted for crimes they committed. That, of course, is not criminalizing politics. That's enforcing the rule of law. It's when you're leaning into it and trying to create legal problems for your opponents just because they're your opponents. That's the real problem.
criminalization of politics is more about the person, not the idea. So it kind of harms the sharing of good ideas by attacking a person who said it. And
Uh,
one more comment on criminalization. So, what kind of people go into a political system that has been criminalized?
well, it deters high quality, good people from entering government because who wants to enter government if ambiguities from your past can be shoehorned into political or criminal charges? It creates an atmosphere of extreme dysfunction and polarization, which again deters quality people from wanting to serve in the first place. So it has a huge impact on the personnel. I mean, the people that gravitate to a political system that's been infected by criminalization are people who are often just reckless and don't care, and they're willing to enter that domain, that highly partisan, polarized domain, because they want to go be an element of that culture. So it sends all the wrong messages if we're trying to attract good quality people to the government. And so that's a good question because that's a real consequence of the criminalized politics that we see. And
Thank you. Well,
that's hard to measure. We don't know about all the good people that have an impulse to serve but don't because of how polarized things are. But there are a lot of them. There's no doubt about it.
thank you. Well, and so what are some solutions that you propose in how we deal with the political situation that we are faced with?
I think the two biggest ones are just be aware of your own biases. We are all biased. I have biases. I constantly check myself. Well, you're believing that too easily. I'll start to believe something. I'm uh I'm not a fan, to put it mildly, of Donald Trump, and I try not to just accept the latest criticism of him. Sometimes the criticisms are wrong, and it's not good for me to just accept them. So being aware of the way our mental machinery functions is really important because once you're aware, you can put the brakes on it. Not always, but you can stop yourself and say, you know what, I'm being biased here. My job as a citizen is to try to be accurate with my thinking. Politicians are incentivized to be partisan hacks, but citizens should want to make sense of the world accurately. I mean, why would you want to delude yourself into anything other than just being accurate with your understanding? So awareness is big. We are biased creatures. We should be aware of that. That can help reduce the bias. The second one is to, I think, try to expose yourself in a variety of ways to the other side. Try to find people on the other side of the aisle who are smart and conscientious and give their views a fair chance. Even if you disagree, you're going to benefit from that. It's enriching intellectually to be exposed to people with differing views who are actually thoughtful people. And then in your everyday life, try to interact with people who come from a different place. You'll often find that people are not as bad as you think. And one example is I think a lot of major Donald Trump supporters, really hardcore Trump supporters, are not just vicious, racist, terrible people. Some of them are. I mean, there's tens and tens of millions of of hardcore Donald Trump supporters. But I think liberals often think, well, if you're MAGA, you're a terrible person. How could you possibly like Donald Trump? You must be terrible. But if you actually talk to some of those people, you'll learn that a lot of them they're not racist, they're not bad people. One example is people feel like they've been very injured by our political system. If you go to swing states and you look at some of the towns that have been decimated by globalization, it's easy for elites to say, oh, well, free trade has made this product less expensive for consumers, so it was worth it. But the fifth generation steel worker, in the plant that's been shut down is going to be devastated. The town's devastated. The family that relied on that income is going to be impacted by that. And that feeling, which is a totally understandable human feeling, is actually why they support Trump because they feel like for the first time, rightly or wrongly, but they feel like for the first time somebody's actually standing up for them. And that's not an impulse that should be that's not a view that should be criticized with disdain. That's a view that should be respected and understood. So spending time with people, learning where they're coming from, what motivates them to think what they think, support who they support, I think is a really important thing we can all do to reduce the partisanship, reduce the tribalism that really is the root cause of so many of our problems.
It becomes very difficult to influence somebody who you continuously avoid. You can only influence somebody if you interact with them, no matter
Absolutely.
how divergent their views are.
Absolutely. You can impact them. And I think equally importantly, they can impact you. They can broaden your perspective, and everybody wins. When you interact with people in a respectful way, in good faith, it has a result, in my view, where everybody wins from that.
Thank you, Will. And last question is, what are the limitations of the book? How would you improve the book?
I think a very valid criticism of the book is that it's too strong on what's wrong with the country and doesn't offer enough solutions. That is a very valid criticism. And it's in some ways easy to criticize, you know, look at the country like a pinata and just start whacking away at it. It's fun to criticize. It's a lot easier to criticize. But then, okay, well, what do we do about it? And the book doesn't have a lot there. And I respect that as a valid criticism and something that I probably should tackle in a future book. It's a hard thing. If there were clear remedies for our problems, we wouldn't be where we are. But the book could have done a better job with that.
Thank you, Will. William, thank you for talking with me about your book, How America Works and Why It Doesn't. Until next time.
Thank you, Eugene.